All you need to grow tomatoes at home are seeds and patience. That is what I said in last episode. Turns out you need something else very important, arguably more important than patience itself. That is, good soil. Technically, you can grow tomatoes without soil. That is what hydroponics are for. But I have a bias towards growing in traditional soil. Soil is an incredible community. I say that because soil is not a thing. It is not just minerals. That you can call dirt. Soil is the mineral home for a galaxy of living beings. Soil is not solely a warehouse that contains a stockpile of nutrients to be mined. It is a hub of biotic activity, transforming elements into accessible plant-available compounds. The key ingredient that makes soil living is organic matter. It is what differentiates mineral dirt from living soil. Organic matter is what gives soil structure by enabling microorganisms to take up residence. I'm absolutely astonished by what's happening over here. I had thrown weeds over here as an experiment to see what happened, and what I got was nothing more than beautiful compost. Frankly, I did put some soil because there were some weeds that had soil in their roots, but this is incredible. It did take me more than a year to create this because I just dumped things over here and it's on top of a piece of concrete, so you know that this is all new stuff. It's amazing. Now, I saw that this weed here, it has a horizontal taproot. It's a perennial weed, so I know it's been growing for more than a year, or at least a year. It was trying to find its way to the soil, but it couldn't because there's concrete over here. So this is incredible, and this gave me an idea. I'm gonna leave these weeds, these perennial weeds around, and I'm gonna try to not let them flower, but whenever I see them and they grow fast, I'm gonna chop the leaves and use it as mulch. It's gonna be a built-in chop and drop right next to whatever I'm trying to plant. I don't want seeds to develop because I don't want these to explode and conquer the whole garden, but if I'm able to keep them contained, then I know that they won't spread too much and they will be contributing to the nutrient increase in the top layer of soil as they mine nutrients from the bottom subsoil. So I'm pretty excited. There is some method to my madness. I'm always trying to prioritize soil creation. Using weeds to create new fertile soil is effective because it transforms a garden problem into a garden solution. The speed by which the transformation of weeds into soil took place astonished me because we don't usually think of soil as something that grows. Most of our soils have been in fact eroding away. But by accelerating the natural systems of soil creation, by speeding up this cycle, we can create better soil faster. Fast-growing weeds are the perfect biological machinery to do this. They grow extremely well fast. That is why they are a possible nuisance to begin with. They are too successful and too prolific, and don't provide enough tasty food directly for humans and take too much effort to control. It is a good idea if you want to compost your weeds in place to do so before they set seed and avoid perennial weed types that reproduce from rhizomes like Bermuda grass. My soil is perfect for tomatoes. It is well draining and fertile, a silty loam. While I am blessed with better river valley soil to begin with, it used to be much more compacted and clay-like. By introducing more organic matter like the composted weeds, my soil got lighter and more fertile. Most beginning gardeners struggle with heavy clay soil. Most newer homes have compacted clay infill as soil, and breaking that up is a work of love. If you don't have your own compost and you are just starting, you can purchase composted leaves to amend your soil. They work wonders. A bit of well-rotted manure can also be used, but it is not a good idea to add too much nitrogen-rich fertilizers like manures when growing tomatoes, otherwise they may grow beautiful, huge leaves and not fruit well. Tomatoes need more phosphorus and potassium to flower and fruit. I also always try to keep my soil covered with mulch. Dried straw, grass clippings, or even chopped up weeds will work especially if you add a thin layer every week or two, so that the greener stuff dries a bit and doesn't clump up and rot. Since I also like to make the most of my small garden, I plant lettuce starts together with the tomatoes. This time I was experimenting with starting lettuce in a box directly, separating the starts as I planted them, instead of using my usual plate germination method in individual cup setup. I purposely covered the bed with the mulch first before planting this lettuce precisely because it's so tender and anything is damaging the leaves. Well, this is not the most effective way or the best way of saving time when you have to deal with such tender plants, but it worked. I still prefer the cup method. I think that's the best one so far that I've come up with. It gives out the best seedlings. Growing lettuce as an intercrop is something I have done more and more recently. In this case, the lettuces mature quickly and are ready to harvest as soon as the tomatoes need staking. This cuts down on the growth of weeds around the tomatoes and provides me with more produce in a smaller space. Where I live, tomatoes take a few weeks after planting to establish their new roots before zooming up and taking up space. If you don't mulch them or intercrop them with short season crops like lettuce, you will have more solar rays reaching the ground, and that stimulates weed growth. It is amazing how weed seeds sprout when exposed to light. Shadier conditions suppress their growth, as they are merely stored in the soil in what is called a soil seed bank. With my bed planted out, all I needed to do was to wait for it to grow, making sure to add light layers of mulch every week or two. I also made sure to keep the bed well watered at first, to give the fledgling seedlings the chance to root up comfortably without experiencing any more stress. The tomatoes especially wasn't looking too good at this point, but I had hoped they would perk up and zoom up in time. Hope is a necessity for a gardener. Coming up in the next block, will my tomato plants do well? What about the ones I had previously grown in the cold frame? You will find out right after this commercial. If you enjoy the videos and would like to support the channel, you can purchase an original painting or drawing in my Etsy shop, or become a patron in my Patreon. About 2 weeks later, the weather had turned for the better, with warmer nights. It seemed that the risk of frost was completely gone. I had to check how the tomatoes planted in the cold frame about 3 weeks previously had fared. I would say that the tomatoes have done well over in here, but not completely surprisingly well. So I think it's time to retire this. The weather has stabilized a little bit more, and it's not getting as cold during the nights, so they're gonna be fine, as I have other tomatoes that I've planted directly in there. They seem to be responding well, so I don't see a purpose of having this here at this point, other than actually making the weeds grow faster. So time to take it off. The cold frame did give a boost to foliar growth, but the ground ivy benefited the most from it. I had not cut it down much before, as I should have, but looking closer at the tomato plants, I could see that the cold frame had helped them. They had put out dark green leaves and had developed a more upright posture. I had picked up the runt of the litter to go into the cold frame, the worst seedlings that looked frail and stunted, and they had managed to perk up again. Since the weeds looked vigorous, I decided to cut them back and allow them to compost on the spot. That way, they would ultimately help the growing tomato plants. The tomatoes had experienced a lot of stress early on, trying to survive in confined cups for more than weeks. Then it would be the ideal as the weather fluctuated from cold snaps to hot spells. Just 2 weeks later, the situation had changed for the better, as even the tomatoes I had planted outside the cold frame looked picture perfect. This tomato bed is showing absolute success, at least for now. The tomato plants look amazing. I think it's because of the way I planted them sideways, as a lot of people suggest, and they're so vigorous, and you can't really compare it to how they used to look The lettuce is very fresh looking and there's barely any signs of slugs, even though it has rained for about 2 weeks. They're amazing. They're growing beautifully, and I know they're gonna be ready soon, and that way I can harvest them, and that will be just when the tomatoes have grown large enough to take over and shade the place. There are very few weeds growing, and I'll attribute that to the fact that I kept this place covered. And I think part of the reason why it's so vigorous, the growth is so vigorous, is because of the fact that I've covered it with mulch throughout the growing season. And as soon as I uncovered it, I planted something into it, so there was a living plant growing in it most of its time. So I just have to take a few weeds away so they don't proliferate, but that's easy work. My goal has been to produce the most I can in the least amount of space and with as little maintenance as possible. Removing weeds is not fun at all, so reduce that chore and make a double duty. As summer approached, the tomatoes looked spectacular. The lettuce had grown beautiful, verdant, tender leaves that were asking to be picked. We've been having an ungodly amount of rain recently, and that has actually made the tomatoes grow spectacularly well, and the lettuce is basically ready to be picked. But I'm worried that it might get blight on the tomatoes because of all the humidity. I'll continue mulching them, and maybe that will stop that. But it has created a good canopy for the lettuce. I think they're gonna still grow, so I'm gonna do a leaf harvest instead of the whole head. And that way I'll prolong the harvest time. By this time, the tomatoes were closing in the canopy, so they needed the extra space. The lettuce had served its purpose of using a potentially wasted space to produce extra food. This year I had gotten the timing to plant out tomatoes a bit wrong because of the weather, but they had overcome those hurdles. They look good for now, but would they get to produce anything as the weather turned wet and muggy, or would they succumb to blight and disease? You will find out in part 3 of my Solanum saga, released next Sunday afternoon. See you there.